Hi, everyone. Today we have Jay joining us. We're going to be going over going to market for Web3 startups, which is always a great topic because I feel like there's not many topics that like strike fear into like early founders' eyes quite as much as bringing up go to market and if they have a strategy. So hopefully for any of you that are fighting the fight of trying to put one together, this will help lay out some good basic guidance on how to approach it. That being said, I'll hand it over to you, Jay, if you want to intro yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Austin. Yeah, I think go to market is quite a loaded word. I tend to use it as a generalization. There's probably a lot of concepts underneath it, subsections, niches, new ideas, but excited to kind of overview as much as I can related to my background. And I'll get into that in a second. And so the whole goal of this presentation is to get as much of the basics and also some of the more advanced topics, at least from a high level overview. And then if there's any interest in diving deeper, you know, in the comment section or the questions, or even if you watch a recording and reach out to me directly on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever it is, happy to kind of dive in a little bit deeper, as there's a lot of depth in a lot of these categories. And this will get you from 0 to 1, especially if you're new to being a founder or an operator or considering something like that. This will kind of get you equipped to get to that point. And so excited to kind of dive in a little bit here. And just a quick about me: was first and foremost a crypto nerd. Marketing was something that was happening in the background as well as crypto. And that was back early Bitcoin days when Ethereum was starting to get populated or popular in people's heads and also just online, especially in the forums. Started to kind of pique my interest a little bit. I wasn't a traditional finance person. I didn't have a finance background. So Bitcoin made sense to some degree, but applications on chain made much more sense to me. And that's really what got me into the space a little bit more deeply, and then started working in the space in 2015 when I merged marketing and also the blockchain passion. Have advised a variety of different companies and also have angel invested in the space for a while, and also have diversified beyond crypto. So fully passionate about the space. I think one of the most crazy things about this space is there's always something you don't know. And I think that's an understatement. There's so much that I think we all don't know, even if you've been here since day one of the industry. There's always infinite amounts of information. And so I think how do we actually encapsulate that here, again, is really the goal here in terms of marketing and also blockchain. More specifically, these are kind of the companies I've been touching for my career. I started actually out building out a music publication. So my background's in music. I think you can also probably tell with my actual background right now, I'm very music heavy. Went to an agency for a little bit. That's where I started to work with crypto brands. And I think that's kind of the start of the crypto career. Like I mentioned before, AirSwap as a DEX shortly after, Avalanche as the L1, and then now currently at Eco, a stablecoin infrastructure company. And so what will we cover? We'll cover 4 basic sections: brand strategy, go-to-market strategy, how to measure and iterate, and then also just general questions and answers. If there are any, I'm happy to actually chat about that. In terms of the marketing mix, this is a really good image that I found online that I think showcases what exactly marketing means, or what a go-to-market strategy could entail, as marketing is a subset of go-to-market. You can see search engine optimization or SEO, search engine marketing, all these different types. In crypto, I think we touch almost every single one of them, but it really depends on what stage you're at. And so just keep that in mind. No, it seems a little overwhelming when you see, a dozen plus bubbles, but effectively you want to focus on a few to start. And we'll touch on that later in the presentation as well. And so the first section is brand strategy. And what does this actually mean? Before we even start with defining that, we want to ask the question, what makes your solution the best? What makes your company the best? It should be quite binary in your kind of reflection of this. If it's leaning towards a no, we might actually have problems way before we get to the go-to-market strategy. We want to maybe consider, should we actually update the product strategy or update the product offering or focus on what value proposition resonates most, so then we can turn that into a yes. This is actually a question that surprisingly a lot of founders, even mature ones, have a difficult time answering. And that's, as a marketer, really difficult. It's the idea that if you as the founder or the inventor or whatever it may be cannot tell the world or cannot tell you that your solution is better than the rest, well, then how can I as a marketer, or how can we as a team tell the world that this solution is the best? And actually, Seth Godin, he's a pretty prominent brand strategist. I actually watched a video at him this morning too, totally as an aside. And this quote, I think, encapsulated what brand really means quite well. A brand is the set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that, taken together, account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another. This is, again, the yes or no question I asked before. I also kind of articulate what we do as marketers in kind of a similar way, where when people ask me what marketing actually entails, I simplify it in the realm of, we are just professional storytellers. If the story doesn't hit, you're a bad storyteller. If the story hits, then you can actually start to convince people to come along your journey effectively. And that's what we really want to do when it comes to brand or narrative strategy. These are some of the things that can make up a brand, not limited to these things, but I think just to kind of visualize exactly what might actually make up a brand, things like competitive advantage, value proposition, what's the promise that you guys offer as a company and individuals as leaders, how do you actually structure the architecture of the brand? If you are a more mature brand, you might have a bunch of different sub brands. It's really important, like a family, you understand who's related to whom, and also how it's related and how people actually perceive that. Again, the storytelling narrative, right? Like if you have many different characters, it would be quite hectic if you just introduce them without any context at all. And typically you have the upfront of a book or a novel or a story where you actually start to go through all the components and leave in the information that is important and leave out the information that may be not as important. So similar kind of way of thinking when it comes to brand. And within the brand construct, what will we focus on? We'll focus on the product and company naming, we'll focus on the visual identity, and then the brand position, some of the key essentials that make up a good brand strategy, or rather a brand component. For naming, I think the main focus should be simplicity. If you focus on simplicity and clarity, all of these bullet points are really just derivatives of that. So make sure the story is aligned. Otherwise, if it's quite random, where you do one thing, but you name it in a word that contradicts exactly what you're doing, that's obviously an extreme example, but may not be the best way to pave that story forward. Stay clear from competition. That's also focused on simplicity. There's a bunch of other points here. Again, all with alignment and clarity and simplicity. Naming will always be important. And so this is something that doesn't just get forgotten or shouldn't get deprioritized after day one. If you think about scale, pick a company like Circle, for example. Circle has a huge portfolio of offerings, including USDC. And so how do you actually create that architecture where you're naming naming the products and solutions that really should have a name, and then also maybe not naming other things that are very deep in the weeds? And that's a decision that you should be thinking of critically every single time. So you're not, again, naming something that is totally irrelevant and then not naming something that should require a name, or maybe thinking more critically about what that name means, because that is all part of your story. The visual identity is the same exact feedback or recommendation. Simplicity is really what's going to help you triumph. So hard to use logos. It may be cool, may be edgy. It's going to be hard to replicate, especially as you go across mediums like, swag, merchandise, potentially even out-of-home ads. All these different things really have to consider replicability of that logo. And if you actually look at some of the most mature brands in the world, not just the largest consumer brands, but also large tech brands that may not be in the mainstream quite yet, but are getting there, they all have very simplistic brand identities and also naming for the most part. The most complicated ones you might not even have heard of, or you have a tough time articulating because simply people have a tough time articulating that across networks and with other people. So I don't know. I forgot if I have the exact example, but especially it happens actually a lot in crypto where you go, oh yeah, it's that M company or that S company. It's because people can't pronounce it or they forget it. And I think that's part of the reason I would argue is because of the naming and the difficulty of that and overcomplicating it. And so what is a brand purpose? This is something that was mentioned in the brand strategy kind of overview. Brand purpose is kind of like a mission statement to me. And as it's written here, it's a brand's reason for being. How does it connect the users, customers on an emotional level, and then acts as a foundation for your company to move forward? In other words, I tend to find it's a way to just be on the same page, internally, externally, and including every single stakeholder that matters at this stage, if nothing else. And what happens sometimes in this early stage is people don't really commit to a brand purpose, or they don't take it seriously enough. And so they create something that works somewhat. And then if you actually go to market with it and you start to socialize it with your investors and your customer base, it starts to vary and it starts to maybe even change completely. And that is a terrible place to be potentially, because then all of a sudden you have a lot of people saying different nuances of what you do, but not beating to the same beat of the drum, so to speak. And so you really want to focus on one statement that you're confident in, at least for the foreseeable future. And if you need to change, then be intentional about that change. When you actually change that brand statement, validate that with data, ideally, and then you're able to pivot cleanly. So then you can actually bring that new strategy or that new statement into the market, and you're still beating to the same beat of the drum, but maybe there's a little bit of a pivot, which is totally okay and natural at this early stage. At Eco, we went out to market with a brand statement last summer. We've fine-tuned it along the way, but made probably one or two major pivots or shifts. Directionally the same, because we took a lot of time to validate that direction, but the words are a little bit different. It feels a little bit tighter towards the customer segments that we've identified. And so it's become much more mature. And I think that's what you want to see. And so I just brought that example up because we've changed it now 2 or 3 times and it's only been a year, and that's totally normal and actually a good sign that the brand strategy is working, and also your broader go-to-market strategy is working because it's validating or invalidating that direction. These are some examples of brand purpose. I tend to like to look at mature companies just for brand strategy because they've obviously, number one, have validated that potentially across decades, but number two, they have a huge marketing and brand strategy team likely who thinks about this all day, every day. And so some of the examples are quite helpful just to really understand what exactly is happening. And I'll take, maybe 1 or 2 examples. So Google probably is one of the most famous ones, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. What I like is it's very, very direct towards the value proposition. It's not saying to create the largest search engine, which is a little bit too matter of fact. It's really focusing on the value proposition for most people. And we can all, as Google users, or at least search users, can relate to that. Disney is another good example. To create happiness for people of all ages. It's not about creating as many movies as possible. It's not about creating the best theme parks. It's really about creating happiness. And what does that do? That encompasses the entire portfolio, so then it can move forward very easily. And then for, sub brands like Disney Parks, Disney Movies, Disney TV shows, whatever it is, you're able to create campaign platforms that should be derivative from that North Star, that kind of 5-year, 10-year brand purpose. So then you can actually still know that you're on the right track, and that this potentially complex portfolio of sub brands are all beating to the same beat of the drum, although speaking slightly nuanced and in different ways based on the customer segments, product offering, and everything else. And I personally believe if your sub brand isn't laddering up to the brand purpose, then there's probably one of two things. One is the brand strategy is not true to your offering. And then number two could be also maybe what you're doing could be out of focus. And especially in startups, this might be true. And so then that indicates potentially to marketers, hey, let's actually go back to the product team and figure out, okay, how do we actually shift this if we need to, or is there something that's misunderstood in the way we're actually positioning this? Because ultimately we need to be in the same house. We needed to be in the same family. Otherwise, it's going to get quite confusing. And within the brand purpose, what are the components that make that up? This is something I took from my Ogilvy days, which is one of the largest agencies in the world. And there's a bunch of different ways to contextualize this, but I quite like this for its simplicity. Company's best self, that first slide we went over, what makes you the best? And then the right side is what is the problem that you're solving? What is the cultural tension that you're addressing? And then out of that, you come up with this purpose, this device of the world would be a better place if your brand does X, Y, and Z, I think is a helpful tool to really tether you to a good strategy development. This is an example of a brand strategy or brand purpose competitive that I've done. I forgot who this was for actually, but during my advisory days, you can see like these are just categories that you create after the fact. What you want to do is, for the most part, unless you're super, super early, it might not be the case. But for the most part, most companies have a mission statement or a brand purpose. I treat both as kind of the same, mostly because they're looking out 5 to 10 years. And so when you think about the brand strategy, you can actually pull this out and then start to see themes. This is when then you start to bucket what are the themes that are tying things together: enablement, individualism, simplicity. And this is mostly just to figure out a white space, but also inspiration for your brand strategy. I also then take from the largest brands or the brands that are out of category, but maybe similar in nature. So in the context of crypto, there's certainly a lot of legacy brands that probably represent what you do, but from just a traditional perspective. And so there's a ton of learning to be had there. And so take those and add them to your competitive set. And once you have that, again, you have this white space where you're starting to understand, okay, maybe I can play in this area because it's very lacks competition or is less competitive. Same thing with this area and this area. Doesn't mean that you should necessarily steer away from areas that are saturated or that are popular, but I think it just gets you a little bit more fine-tuned on what you can say and can't say, because you don't want to say the same thing as your competitors. Otherwise, likely if your competitor is already saying it, then you're going to be late and you're going to be not at the first mover, and they likely also own that category or at least have a leg up, and you're going to be swimming upstream otherwise. Another kind of example here, I did this with I think a fashion brand, Web3 fashion brand. So similar, but a little bit different in terms of brand, but same idea. This one I think was maybe for, actually this might've been for us, but payments, on-chain payments, probably realistically, as I look through these brands at a quick glance. And so what comes after this? You want to develop your positioning statement, your boilerplate, as we call it in more of the communications space. The 2 or 3 sentence description of what exactly you do. Sometimes it can include your brand purpose. Sometimes it cannot. It really depends on what stage you are. If you want to focus on launching your brand campaign, as I suggest on this slide, you can do so. And so this was a little bit outdated, but a sample boilerplate that we developed at Eco for the first few quarters of the company. And you can quickly see that there is kind of brand strategy integrated into it, but also a little bit of utility on exactly what Eco does. And this is actually on all of our, or at least an updated version is on all of our social media, digital platforms, everything that requires a quick description. This is basically your elevator pitch. And now once you've baked in this brand strategy that is now set in place, at least for the time being, you want to then move on to go to market. And like before, a good way to simplify what a go-to-market strategy entails is all these questions: who, what, where, when, why, how. If you're asking all those questions and you have an answer for all of them, then you have a very comprehensive go-to-market strategy, or at least an overview of it. And of course, you need to figure out how to execute within the weeds, but at least from a top layer, you at least are in the right direction. If there's questions unanswered, of course, go back and make sure that they are answered. Another blueprint that you can use, or another kind of roadmap that you can use to help shape your go-to-market strategy, is a traditional marketing funnel. This one I like because it highlights 5 different sections. People usually simplify into 3, which is upper funnel, middle funnel, lower funnel. Tofu, mofu, bofu, I think is what is common in the industry. I don't really use those as much, but or at least the shortened versions as much. But I like this because it gets a little bit more specific, and then also maps exactly what marketing channels are mapped against that part of the funnel, which isn't necessarily as black and white as it's describing. And then the KPIs, how do you actually measure success there? And discovery, it can be, I'll just use an example. It can be like Google search. You go to Google search to figure out something about something you want to know. So let's pick like a stablecoin company. Let's just do Circle, for example. Before you learned about Circle, you probably used Google, or maybe saw it on a web ad, or maybe saw it on a social ad, something about Circle. And that's when you want to discover a little bit more about the category. You might Google things like, what is stablecoins? What is a blockchain? What is cryptocurrency? Are stablecoins stable? Like these types of basic questions that are very, very upper funnel, that are very early in a customer or prospective customer's journey or life cycle. And then as you go all the way down, I'm going to just skip down to the conversion side. That's likely when you're on the website, you're on the Circle website, you're on the USDC website, your checkout page. I don't know, let's draw a parallel there for Circle. You might be in a demo page where you want to demo how to integrate USDC. You're on the product and services page where they compare USDC with other competitors like Tether and Athena and whatever else. Because at that point, probably the stablecoin category fairly well. The blockchain category fairly well. You've done a decent amount of research. You're willing to now take the plunge to then convert, to then either buy the product or try the product. And that's all the way down. And in between is basically the in-between between discovery and conversion. And that's kind of a quick and dirty way of describing what a marketing funnel is. I find this super useful. I map out all of our capabilities against this just so I can understand exactly how we're using all of these channels, because every single channel does have a different purpose based on how you want to use it. There are standards, so to speak, of how people in the industry or marketers tend to use it, but it's not, again, black and white. There's all these nuances based on who your customers are, how they behave, and how the channels also evolve, of course, amongst other things. This is another blueprint I think is also helpful. It's a little bit more of a visual, kind of like a breadcrumbs type model. And so again, you can do the same exercise where you go to PR, you read about Circle and USDC gaining a lot of traction. You then want to do a little bit of research with search and go through email and go down, and maybe you want to consider things. So you're going to follow them on Twitter and LinkedIn just to really like keep tabs on them, and also keep tabs on the competitor. And you just keep going all the way down. Another really useful exercise to make sure that your customer journey is mapped out to your media mix or your marketing channels that you actually have outlined. And then when we move over to like messaging, this is something you see a lot in crypto, Twitter, actually, or at least recently I've seen it a lot, especially in the marketing circles. Focus on values, not features. I think when we get into tech, even I'm at fault of this a lot. You tend to want to focus on like the 1 gigabyte of storage. It's like the 10,000 TPS. You've seen things like 500 milliseconds of speed. Like, I think these are all helpful to qualify the benefit, but I wouldn't put that front and center, because most people really can't contextualize what 10,000 TPS looks like, or what, under 10 milliseconds looks like. You can't even understand that as a human. And so instead, maybe things like, the TPS would be, if you're focusing on developers, like, no need to worry about scaling, just focus on building your applications. Messaging you see a lot in L1s. Just to use one more example off the top of my head, let's see the milliseconds, like so fast. So maybe it's like transfer so fast that your users will never complain. Like, really focus on what that benefit for your customers ideally, but also putting your product, of course, front and center of that benefit. And so I find that this table is actually really good because it just boils it down to very simple concepts like the iPod that most people know, and even some of the other tools that are right under here showcases this a little bit better. And so what makes up a campaign? Strategy documentation, just kind of the backbone of what you're exactly doing. Blog and or press release. I think in crypto, we tend to always have a blog just for the single source of truth. But then also if we can hit it or we can land it with a journalist, we'll obviously transform that into a press release, which is more of just a clean down version, but typically can be the same actually. Distribution plan, what are the key channels you want to focus on? Amplification cohort, investors, advisors, maybe even MVP or VIP customers who are really, really evangelized by your brand, who can actually push that out as best as possible. I almost say this is like a default. You have to have this as default. Everyone's doing it. If you're not doing it, you're just gonna do yourself a disservice with at least out the gate performance from marketing, from the marketing strategy or the campaign. And then most importantly, I think this is where most people miss the mark or fail a little bit, is sustaining the campaign. Just because you're out with the announcement doesn't mean it's over. You have to repeat that multi-channel, not just socials. And so I think good examples would be content strategy. Like, how do you actually convince people down the funnel that this integration is amazing and that you should use this product? Repeat the narrative over and over and over on socials, which is more of, I think, a default in our space. I think people do a good job with that. Third would be, just another example is maybe more press, maybe more media. You could do some sort of media tour to really talk about more upper funnel or mid funnel topics that are related to this product launch or this feature launch or this integration. And so sustaining should last typically months, but if for some reason you can't swing that, at least a month. And if it's really, really important, really more than that, should be like a quarter or so. And you'll start to see channels indicate to you with feedback real time, especially if it's socials. If it's negative feedback, that's something that you can actually go back to the strategy and maybe tweak a little bit. If it's negative feedback all the time, well, then maybe turn to the product and figure out, okay, perhaps it is a product issue, or maybe it's a sales issue, or there's something where you can start to look internally. Again, you're at the front lines of the company. And so your role is to be able to really catch all of that feedback, good and bad, and then put that in the virtuous cycle of a really strong and healthy organization. And that's also what we're doing at Eco. I think we've always had that mindset from day one. I think it's a lifelong thing or a company long thing, to be honest. We're getting, of course, better, but there's always margin to just be tighter and tighter. Even when you have, I believe, if you have, a company like NVIDIA where you have really strong market fit, or a really big company, I think they're a good companies now thinking, okay, how do we actually pull away farther? How do we actually maintain that lead? How do we account for disruption and maybe even black swan events in the market or the industry that we can't account for? Because if you're not, I think you get left behind. These cycles are really, really fast, innovation cycles in tech, especially, not just crypto. And you should always have your head on a swivel. And I touched on this a little bit, but how do you bring this all to market? Bring the brand to market, focus on the focus on the critical channels, begin running product and customer-centric campaigns, and then product launches and key dates as tentpole moments, if you will, to kind of carry that narrative forward. And that entire time, all of these touch points should then be encapsulated with some sort of North Star with the brand strategy. And that's really what brand is all about as we kind of come full circle from the beginning. And again, we're coming back literally full circle to this graph of media mixes. And hopefully this feels a little bit less overwhelming, because now okay, well, let's just pick. I use the rule of threes, right? Arbitrarily, to be honest, but it helps. Let's pick 3 channels. That should be the start. If you have a team of 1, which a lot of people in the industry are, well, you're probably only going to be able to focus on a handful, right? So if you focus on 3 the first time and that was very easy to execute, move on, and let's see if you can add 4, and so on and so forth. And if you can't, well, then figure out how you can actually optimize those processes to add more bandwidth. Or maybe there's a point where you plateau so much where you've tried everything you can to maintain and optimize, And therefore, it might be worthwhile to have that conversation of, okay, do we actually add more headcount or maybe agency support or something else to change what you're doing? Because at that point, you're likely tapped out in terms of resources. Or maybe, when I say change what you're doing, one quick example could be maybe even like deprioritizing a channel that isn't working for you. And you'll know something's working or not just simply looking at the data. I use native analytics to start and then start to tack on third party, but I don't go to third party immediately because oftentimes all these channels have really strong native analytics that do require a little bit of manual maintenance and also technical knowledge. But once you really know how to capture that, it's just about reporting over and over and over. Yeah, so I'm looking at some of the questions just because I think it's topical to one. So I think Louis, in your experience, what are the best 3 channels to focus on if you had to pick 3 from your chart? I would say, it's a nuanced question because it depends on who your customers are, like B2B, B2C, what your priority is. But I'll just give one example or one generalization that I think usually fits. If you're a crypto company, you're likely going to be digital first because it's tech. Because it's digital first and your customer base is likely going to be on digital platforms or at least digitally native, like consuming social media, consuming digital articles, consuming digital press and publication, whether on desktop or mobile, it doesn't matter. But as long as digital, I think that's the assumption we're going to make with this recommendation. I start with content because content is kind of the backbone of the story that you're trying to tell. Content could be like in the form of hosting it natively on your blog. And as a side plug, make sure to host your blog natively, not as a subdomain, as a path. Otherwise, SEO will treat those 2 properties separate. So what I mean is blog.eco.com is a totally different site from the eyes of search versus eco.com/blog. It is very important you can do this. And I push for these technical components just for like long-term success and growth. So blog is good for source of truth. I think number 2 is distribution. You're going to probably need to pick, and I batch this, I kind of cheat a little bit with the 3, but social. You can use a scheduling tool like Buffer or Sprout Social to really scale that up. So you don't always have to be on. If I had to pick the social channels, I'd do Twitter, LinkedIn, actually just those 2 to start probably. You could probably just optimize your strategy for Twitter and then just make sure you get posts onto LinkedIn every day, or at least every other day, or at least three to 5 times a week. And when I count a week, I count the 7 days. If you do that, you have a very strong now multi-channel social strategy. And now you can kind of hedge a little bit because Twitter is a really good ground for testing your messaging, and LinkedIn doesn't quite have that leniency on like posting every 2 hours. And it's also a little bit more buttoned up and a little bit more corporate and a little bit more B2B. And so you probably also don't want all your Twitter content on your LinkedIn content. This is what we've done in Eco. You can kind of check it out for yourself on how we're doing it. We found certain successes on what strategy works and what doesn't. I won't go into the exact strategy there. That's maybe if we have time later, but that's the second one, social. Well, actually, I'll also add YouTube. Sorry. One quick plug for YouTube as a social channel is oftentimes you're probably doing podcasts and interviews. And so that's where you could actually just add them to playlists and curate your YouTube channel without creating content yourself. You can just basically be an aggregation page for all the channels and podcasts, all the podcasts that are recorded on different channels. It's a very easy hack, actually. And we do that. I've done that at every company I've been at in crypto. And I think the third would probably be like this more broad earned media category. I kind of debate between earned media and search. So I'll explain why. And so that's why I think you can kind of pick and choose. Earned media, if you have a really strong press capability, you have a really strong founder base, you yourself as a leader in the companies also have strong relationships and are able to get into podcasts, into publications, then go ahead and do it. But if you don't have that, it's quite an uphill battle unless you know how to pitch, you know how to build relationships. And it can be actually quite difficult there. And so instead, maybe search is kind of the audible, I can use them interchangeably. Search, there's a ton of stuff going on in search right now. Search, as you all probably know, has changed quite significantly, even in the last 6 months because of AI. there's really good strategies that actually you can run that's helped by AI to rank up in search engine result pages. Google is, of course, the biggest one, but also don't forget Bing. Bing in the United States, I believe, has about 7% market penetration. I think globally it's around 12. I might be mixing up those stats, but effectively it's about 10% roughly. And so even though it doesn't have most of the market share like Google, it's still a search engine to definitely play in. I love to play in channels or arenas, if you will, that no one else is playing. Why? Because you can actually win that game much more easily than if, everybody in crypto is playing Twitter. Not to say that because of that, don't do it. I think it's very important, but to win that mind share game and also eventually that market share game is quite difficult. And so to complement that difficult strategy with much more easy strategy is also quite helpful. So from the top, it would probably be social content, like with a blog, and then also search or earned media like press and media placements there. And then after that, just keep pushing that as much as possible, record month over month, and then move on to adding more if you can, but only if you can. Good question. And then the last section, and then I know there's other questions too, so I'll get to that, I think, after this section, is just measuring and iterating. Really important. I think there's a lot of debate on crypto native measurement platforms and how they're better. I won't necessarily comment on better or worse, but I tend to lean towards the tried and true. I come from a traditional marketing background early days. And so I've just used these platforms since I was an analyst, and they still work really well. I just think some people think that there's this elusive crypto category, and wallet data is super important, but I think you can still get that elsewhere. And I'll explain a little bit, but how do you actually focus on a good stack that works for you? Focus lean and powerful. If you download or buy or pay for too many things, you're going to get into this burden of choice, and you might not even use all of them, which is a problem, and you're just going to burn money. And also may also not even report, which is the problem that we're trying to solve. So build a foundational tech stack, use built-in analytics or native analytics, like I kind of alluded to before. Focus on these three categories to help enable you to do more planning, distribution, and measurement, as we kind of broken down this presentation into that kind of flow. And then consider on-chain metrics if needed. I wouldn't worry about too much of attribution. You can just use hotspots for now. If you focus too much on attributions on day zero, you probably have to build a proprietary stack to figure that out, or maybe use one of the more expensive tools, which might be a bigger risk, at least at this stage, early stage, when I think about the 0 to 1 stage. These are some of the tools that we use actively. I'm pretty sure we use all of them. The only one we don't use right now is 3RM, only because they don't exist anymore, I believe, but super useful. So CRM generally is what I'm pushing for. Notion is just kind of our indexer for everything that we do, ways of working. Brevo is quite crypto friendly. It used to be called Sendinblue. I like it because you're able to customize your templates quite easily. Our designer can kind of get in there, dress it up, and I haven't had any problems with it. And the cost is quite efficient relative to like a MailChimp, and I think others. Also, MailChimp historically hasn't been crypto friendly, so you got kind of banned or shadow banned even sometimes without warning, which was quite difficult. Buffer is great for social scheduling at this early stage. If you get bigger and you have a huge social team, you might want to graduate towards something like a Sprout Social, which we did at Avalanche, and also my prior experiences, we did that kind of natural arc as well. SEMrush is search analytics, incredible. Most people don't use it because they don't have a search background, but I use this almost every day to figure out what content we should actually create based on data. Figma for design, Claude just to help with like kind of this manual automated kind of flow, I guess, vibe marketing, so to speak, helps with just wordsmithing, nuances. I typically, I have really good templates that prompt Claude now. Like here, this is the customer segment. This is the draft that I have. How do you make it tighter? Obviously, taking it verbatim is still probably not the best idea for both AI platforms or whatever AI platform you use, but it certainly accelerates your workflow, and at least has accelerated mine. So highly recommend there. And then the bottom is mostly analytics, search analytics. We have Bing as well for our side. Webflow for web design. I like it because it's technical and designer friendly. Like what you see is what you get. And so for someone like me who doesn't know how to code, I can at least make some basic changes if I need to, at least at this early stage. Attio and 3RM from organizing your business leads and your sales leads, and whoever's coming down the funnel and converting in your newsletter capture, at least in our case. And you can actually then hand this off to the sales team or the BD team quite efficiently and figure out where everything is at. And then most importantly, the rest of the team can kind of chime in and jump into these databases and really understand what is in flight and what is maybe new to the funnel or the sales funnel. And I think as kind of a wrapper here, as we get into the questions and answers section, just wanted to kind of bring it home where we covered what does a brand strategy make up? How do you actually bring that to life and bring that into the channel mix, the 3 channels that we talked about earlier? And then kind of finally, how do you actually loop that back to measure? And to kind of encapsulate what I said in the beginning, simplicity is really the key here. So if you're able to conquer this first V1 and then figure out how to slowly and in a modular way tack on more capabilities, that's the way, in my opinion, because then you're going to be able to validate your capabilities. You're going to also be able to understand where your bandwidth is. Are you at 100%, 100% where you're totally tapped out, or you're at 110% where you're really, really tapped out, or you're at 80%? And that way you can actually grow more naturally. And it kind of reminds me of, you as a human growing up as a kid, right? Like you don't learn everything all at once. You don't learn about, AP physics when you should be learning that in high school. When you're at 5 years old, you learn about maybe even basic things like how to count, how to actually spell. These foundational elements are what accelerate your ability to learn for much more complex concepts. This is the same as marketing. Your ability to do the basics is going to be able to help you do more. And ultimately, this is an oversimplification, but all these marketing channels are very similar. And if you know one or two, typically you can actually learn the others quite easily because they all kind of are based on a similar foundation, just as typically different with let's pick YouTube versus search. YouTube has search in it. And so it functions similarly where it uses keywords, it uses metadata, and it has a certain algorithm that it uses to find the answers that the customers or the users want. And so that's just one quick example of why I think there's a lot of similarities, and you can actually test this out with a lot of different things. And typically, especially if it's digital, there's a lot of similarities there, which can feel empowering because it's not as overwhelming now when you kind of go back to that media mix. Okay, and then I think Christian, yeah. So I think we'll upload the high res later so you can kind of see exactly what is being said. But yeah, happy to take any questions if there are any. But if not, feel free, if you're watching the recording, to reach out to me. Twitter, I'm pretty responsive. My handle's at JAYKS. Happy to kind of dive deeper on this stuff. As you can tell, very passionate about it. I'm always eager to learn too. So if you have any strategies that you've tried that worked, share with me. I'm happy to listen and actually try them myself and see if I can make it work in the context of Eco or other brands that I'm helping out currently. Oh, I think you're on mute, maybe, Austin. Or at least I can't hear you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jay, for stopping by. Always great information whenever you come through. Of course, if anybody has any additional questions that come up as you're kind of thinking through this, maybe implementing some of it, feel free to shoot it my way, and I might be able to kind of filter through and get you the answers that you need. Otherwise, yeah, we'll get the deck, if possible, uploaded in the chat. So if you did have any problems viewing anything, you can view it there. Also, the upload that goes through should be a little bit higher quality after the stream is done. But other than that, yeah, thank you so much, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for having me as always, Austin. Appreciate it.
Perfect. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.